What is up, everybody? Talking Tunes with Sean. New episode. I was thinking of something to do for this episode, and I actually have a cool idea that we're going to be doing in this episode. This is going to be over the course of a few parts. And it's not going to be continuous, but every so often, I'm going to have a little mini series within this series called My Favorite Albums of All Time. There's a lot of them, and we're going to talk about them. I'm going to pick a few for each episode. In this episode, I picked 6. But at any given time in the future, I could talk about more. I listen to a lot of music, a lot of genres of music. I cover it all. And I have a lot of favorite albums, but these are albums that are my all-time best of best. To make this series and to make this list, they have to be the best of the best of the best. I love the whole album, every track. I've listened to it hundreds of times. It's just my all-time favorite albums, and albums that really meant a lot to me. They may have a story behind them. They may have memories behind them. Going to concerts, a time in my life where I listened to the album, all that. And these albums are special to make this list because I listen to a lot of things, new and old, and I cover a lot of things. And I have, hundreds of thousands, literally, of CDs in binders, collector's edition CDs, cassettes, vinyl, massive music collection, one of the biggest. Everything up to the newest stuff that came out this week. I order about 85 CDs a month. Digital and physical. Collector's editions. I know a lot of people that own a lot of record stores around here. I get a lot of deals with them. I get stuff signed from bands. I get a lot of promotional stuff. I do a lot of artwork for a lot of bands. Right here in PA, right over the border of where I live in Jersey, as soon as you cross the border, you're in PA. Breaking Benjamin, the band Breaking Benjamin plays there. Not too far from there is Hailstorm, Fuel, Allentown, and a lot of Jersey bands, a lot of New York bands. So I listen to a lot. I go to a lot of shows. So I picked 6 albums to talk about in this episode. And these are albums that, again, these are flawless albums to me. Everybody's going to have different opinions. And when I do these episodes, I would absolutely love to hear your favorite albums of all time, because this is a music podcast. This is a series where we talk about music, any genre, any kind. Concerts, music, an event, anything that has to do with music, we cover on this series. So I would love to hear from you guys. Let's get right into it. And I have to go with one of my favorite albums of all time, Marilyn Manson, Antichrist Superstar. I chose this to kick the series off because, let me tell you something. This is an impactful album on so many fronts. Because one thing that I really bring to memory with this album is the live shows and the concerts that went with this album, with this tour. And to this date, when he was in his prime, during this album, nobody could put on a show or touch the stage like Marilyn Manson. He owned the stage, owned it. And I had people that used to hear me say the name, Marilyn Manson. They never even really listened to him. They just knew the name, and they would go, he's creepy. I don't want to listen to him. And I got some of those people to actually go to a show with me They became instant fans. They couldn't believe the show. And Antichrist Superstar, in my opinion, was probably between the album and how he broke out and how he just became a menace. I mean, he became a freaking tyrant of the music industry. And that's why when I listen back to this album and the whole album flows, the whole album is like a greatest hits album. Every freaking track rocks. Every track live is insane. And the music videos, it's just, and it's one of the most powerfulest moving albums I think ever created in history of albums. Truthfully, and I listen to a lot and I listen to it all. Every genre of music, every year, every style, every band, thousands and thousands and thousands of a lot. And to say that this album is that impactful to me, because I'm putting it up against a lot of albums, this really was something. And I'll never forget when I first heard this album. I mean, his other albums, you know, were very moving and, like, you know, I gave you that wow factor. I mean, especially the earlier albums. Nothing like this album. This was a shocking album, especially for its time. This was a very shocking album. A very vulgar, shocking, shock rock, crazy album. Crazy concert, crazy tour that went with it. Not for the faint of heart, let me tell you. But, in my opinion, Antichrist Superstar is, you know, to this day, it's funny too, because to this day, a lot of these albums that I'm going to mention, but to this day, I still get the same feelings and vibes when I first listened to it. Nothing has changed. As soon as I hear those guitar riffs, that piano, those vocals, Antichrist Superstar, I think, is one of those CDs that you would bring to a deserted island. If somebody said, you know, you could only bring so many albums, this is the one. And I could go into detail for hours about each song. Listen, this is the album that I'm kicking the series off with because it's just an unbelievable album. One of my all-time favorite. Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power. My father introduced me into Pantera. And I was listening to Cowboys from Hell. I absolutely loved that album. But when I heard this album, I just wanted to go around and break everything I could. I just wanted to make my own mosh pit. I was very fortunate enough to see this band back in the day and watch a lot of these songs performed live. I actually saw them a few times at Ozfest. I got to meet them. Later on, tragically, the death of Dimebag. But this album is another album that, exactly like it is on the cover, punched me in my face. The music just, you know, the whole album worked together. And let me tell you something. It's one of those albums where you remember every word to every freaking song. And when you're at the shows and you hear these songs, you're bobbing your head up and down, you're fucking singing every lyric. And these songs work great live. They're iconic. An iconic album. Vulgar Display of Power. One of the best albums of all time, in my opinion. It started a whole entire movement. I mean, a whole genre. It's just so many bands today take after Pantera, but so many bands today take after this album. I hear so much of this album in newer music and newer metal, and this is like this was like kick your ass, and it still is. I was actually listening to it. I was working on some photography edits for a client not too long ago, and I was cranking this in the background. I mean, it's just phenomenal music. It's like you can't not be motivated by it. It's that kind of music. Megadeth. Countdown to Extinction. Oh my God. There's not a single song on this album that is not an absolute gem. And this is another album that gives me a lot of memories because I just remember cranking this back in the day with my dad, cranking this back in the day with my uncles. They got me into the whole Megadeth scene. My dad has a 13 brothers and sisters, and he's got some younger ones, and they were big into Megadeth. I remember my dad's younger brother used to go out in his car and crank Megadeth in the cassette player. And, I just grew up listening to these albums, and I just fell in love with this album. I fell in love with it. I absolutely am obsessed with Dave Mustaine. I absolutely love Megadeth, but to me, this album just is a lot of memories, I think. That's why this album means a lot to me. And another album that just flows together. It's got a great chemistry, and the songs are great live. And they're just such iconic songs. I mean, every one is a single. Every one is like a jam hit. And to me, it's some of the best of Megadeth. I mean, a lot of people give me flack, oh my God, the older albums. Absolutely. But I'm telling you, for me personally, this is the album. This album is the one that spoke to me the most for all those reasons that I said. And still to this day, when I listen and crank this album, it just reminds me of the day when I first heard it. And for a while, I would hear these songs in the background as I was doing other things, and then, they kind of grew on me. And then I started taking interest in listening to it. And then I was like, yeah, now I get why, my family members were really digging this album. And then I remember that after this, I was like obsessed with Megadeth. I just went out and bought every one of their CDs. I bought vinyl. I went to their shows. It took off from there. Rob Zombie, Hellbilly Deluxe. I still get goosebumps when I see the album cover of this album. I wish I could tell you how many times I've listened to this album. Gotta be thousands of hours. I'll never forget, I was so obsessed with this album. It never left my CD Walkman or my Discman. It never, ever left it. I remember even when I first got my first iPod and I transferred all my music over, this was on spin, on total rotation. I was a huge White Zombie fan, and I loved like Thunder Kiss 65 and all that, but I just thought that this album was like the shit. Every freaking song. The music videos, they were like mini movies, mini horror films. The production of his shows for this album. And I just remember saying to myself, man, Rob Zombie is the freaking man. I used to go to school in like high school. And, this is way before YouTube and all that. I would put videos that we would download onto like an SD card or like a flash drive or a big zip drive, big zip, whatever they were. And I would take them to school, and we would plug them into our computer during like study hall, and we would just fucking watch Rob Zombie videos. Crappy quality, but at the time, we didn't give a shit. We used to watch them through like Windows Media Player or whatever it was, QuickTime Player. And we used to fucking watch music videos that way. And every time the teacher would walk around to see what we were up to, we would Alt-Tab and switch to another program of like doing our homework. Yeah, right, okay. I used to bring in South Park episodes to school. I got my whole school watching South Park on a flash drive, on a zip drive. But anyway, then one time we had an actual shared network drive, and I put like Slipknot videos on it, and I kind of got in trouble. But anyway, this album kicked major ass. So, those of you that follow me, or maybe you don't know, Metallica is one of my number one all-time favorites. I got a soft spot for Metallica. Went to a ton of their shows. Obsessed with all their albums. They could do no wrong in my book. You know, the total fanatic. Man, Ride the Lightning. A classic, kick-ass, heavy, brutal, even to this day when I listen to it, just a fucking, I mean, you want to give somebody one album out of their giant, incredible discography, Ride the Lightning. Such iconic songs, Fade to Black, Creeping Death, Fight Fire with Fire, one of my favorite songs of all time. Brutal, early thrash metal. The roots of Metallica. I love the album artwork. Love the vinyl. Another one that my dad's brother, my uncle would fucking crank all day. Then my dad was got me into this album. Shit. I got all my friends into this album. Then people start wanting to borrow the album, borrow the CD, borrow the vinyl, borrow the cassette tape. Man, what an album. That's all I could say. And I had to include it in this part one of my favorite albums of all time because, man, how could I not mention Ride the Lightning right from the start? The songs all flow together good on the album. The songs are great live. And just a great album. And last but not least for this episode, Stained, Dysfunction. Let me tell you something about this album. Now, see, even looking at this album cover, I got like thousands of things going through my head. It's amazing how things trigger memories. I became obsessed with Stained. Aaron Lewis was actually one of my favorite singers. I thought his voice was phenomenal, especially his really early stuff. Like before Fred Durst had found them. And, when they were really, really heavy. There's a lot of tones of that on this album. This is like one of those Stained albums where if you ever want to hear Stained at their heaviest, it's this album. Because later on they got more mellower hard rock. Dysfunction had, to me, the best of both because it had phenomenal melodic vocals, the top of his game, Aaron Lewis. Songs like Home, Just Go. But then you had like Raw, Mud Shovel, Crawl, fucking nasty, heavy shit, screaming. But not just heavy for the sake of being heavy, good, well-made songs. And another album that just worked all together. Another album that there's not one fucking track. You don't skip these albums, okay? You don't skip tracks on these albums. These aren't iTunes albums where you go and buy one or two songs, okay? This was back in the day where we bought an album, we sat, we listened through the whole album, we looked at the artwork, we read the liner notes, the whatever, and it was just a phenomenal experience, a music album experience that the artist intended. It's not like today where kids buy one or two songs off an album. It's just disgusting. And to me, Dysfunction was done right. And there'll be never be another album like this. For its time and everything. And this was another album that I brought to school, and I just constantly played it. And every song is kick-ass, no matter what kind of genre of music you like. Because to me, this just covered it all. It's just got the best of both. It's like hard rock, it's like heavy, but it's all meshed together. Stained was a very talented band in its day, and they were very heavy too, because a lot of people think of them as like, I'm on the outside, and like songs like that. It's been a while. Great songs, but man, when I think of fucking Stained, I think of fucking this album, and they're just badass, brutal, heavy. And another band that I seen a whole mess of times live. My favorite time seeing them was when they opened up for Korn, and Korn let them use their equipment, and they did Need To. That was iconic. That was in the Meadowlands in New Jersey. What a great show. I think that was for Issues. I want to say that was the Issues tour. And we'll get to those albums in a future episode. But Stained Dysfunction, fucking great album. And that is part one of my greatest albums of all time. This is the latest episode of Talking Tunes with Sean. Comment below, guys. I would love to know what your, what your picks are. For your greatest albums or your favorite albums of all time. There's much more to come. I think you guys are going to really like what I have in store. Okay? And I'm really interested to know if you agree with me on any of these. Really interested in that. Take care, guys. Until the next episode of Talking Tunes with Sean, I'll be seeing you again soon.